Before I went to school, I was hanging around Joe's garage. Then I started to do brake jobs and stuff for the neighborhood. They gave me money. I was just absolutely stunned. Went to Patterson Tech for aviation technology. Very tough school.
One of the biggest mysteries in the classic car world has finally started to unravel. For years, Roger Barr and Wayne Carini appeared inseparable. They built businesses together, chased dream cars together, and became familiar faces to fans across America. Then, almost overnight, Roger was gone with no public explanation or farewell. Just silence. So, what really happened behind the scenes that caused one of television's most successful automotive partnerships to fall apart? And why is Roger Barr only now beginning to tell his side of the story, after years of staying quiet? Join us as we uncover the shocking truth behind Roger Barr's split from Wayne Carini, the mechanic who made the show worth watching. Chasing Classic Cars premiered on Discovery Channel in 2008 and quickly became one of the most beloved automotive shows on television, built around a deceptively simple premise. Wayne Carini, the owner of F40 Motorsports in Portland, Connecticut, would track down rare and historically significant vehicles across the country, negotiate to buy them, and then bring them back to his shop to be restored and resold to collectors around the world. What turned the show from a competent restoration program into something fans genuinely loved was not just Wayne's eye for cars or his talent for finding them in barns and basements across America. It was the man standing beside him in the workshop, hands buried in an engine, telling stories while he worked. Roger Barr had been a mechanic at F40 Motorsports for years before the cameras ever arrived. And when Chasing Classic Cars began filming, he became one of its most consistent and beloved fixtures. Audiences loved him both for his personality and for his extensive, hard-earned knowledge of classic and antique automobiles. He was the elder statesman of the garage, the man who could look at almost any engine and know exactly what it needed. His appeal was the opposite of manufactured reality television charisma. He did not have a catchphrase. What he had was decades of genuine expertise, a dry sense of humor, and the kind of patience that comes from a lifetime spent coaxing old machines back to life. Fans who watched the show across its first 14 seasons came to think of Roger as something close to family. The reliable presence in the garage who made every restoration feel grounded in real craftsmanship rather than television spectacle. The bond between Wayne and Roger was part of what made the show work. Their chemistry on screen, the easy back and forth between the boss who chased the cars and the mechanic who brought them back to life, was just as engaging to many viewers as the vintage vehicles themselves. It looked, from the outside, like the kind of professional partnership that simply does not break. And then, after the 14th season, Roger Barr was not there anymore. There was no explanation from the show. He simply stopped appearing, and the silence around why left fans confused and increasingly worried. So what actually happened to Roger Barr? And why did Discovery Channel never tell its audience the truth? The infection that started everything. The official record of what happened to Roger Barr begins in 2017, with an injury that should have been minor and turned into something that changed the entire rest of his life. In August 2017, Barr developed a severe leg infection while performing his regular duties at F40 Motorsports. Working on classic and antique cars involves exactly the kind of small cuts, scrapes, and exposure to old grime and rust that most mechanics learn to live with and largely ignore. For a man in his 70s, the consequences of that kind of minor injury were considerably more serious than they would have been for someone decades younger. According to accounts shared by people close to the situation, Roger believed the infections that ultimately laid him up were specifically connected to working on a Minerva, a rare vintage vehicle that Wayne Carini and his business partner Ralph Marano had purchased and brought into the shop. The exact mechanism of the infection has never been spelled out in granular medical detail in any of the public reporting, but the consistent thread across every account is the same. Roger got hurt doing the work that had defined his entire career, and what should have been a recoverable injury became something far more serious because of his age and the specific demands of the job. He spent time in the hospital fighting the infection. By his own account, he was determined to keep going and tried to return to short shifts at the shop despite ongoing pain. He said he knew something was not right and that he eventually needed knee surgery and needed it urgently. A man who had spent decades working underneath classic cars, kneeling and crouching and crawling through engine bays, was now facing the prospect of major joint surgery brought on directly by the physical toll of the job he loved. What happened next is where the story moves from a simple account of an aging mechanic's health struggles into something considerably more complicated and, for a lot of longtime fans, considerably more uncomfortable to learn. The workers' compensation fight nobody saw coming. The detail that turned Roger Barr's medical setback into a genuine controversy within the classic car community was not the injury itself. It was what happened or did not happen in the aftermath. Roger was 82 years old at the time and was no longer working full-time at F40 Motorsports, a fact that, according to people close to the situation, meant he no longer qualified for workers' compensation coverage in the way he might have if he had still been classified as a full-time employee. For a man whose injury had been sustained directly while working on a car for the shop, that technicality had real and immediate financial consequences. What made the situation more painful for many longtime fans of the show was learning from Roger's family that rather than supporting his attempt to secure compensation for the injury, Wayne Carini was reportedly opposing it, for reasons that were never made publicly clear. According to the account shared by his son on Roger's own social media page at the time, the family was facing real financial strain, with an elderly couple trying to cover medical costs and daily expenses while Roger was laid up and unable to work. A friend of Roger set up a GoFundMe campaign to help cover the costs that the family was facing during this period. The existence of that fundraiser, for a man who had spent over a decade appearing on one of the most popular automotive shows on cable television, was a detail that struck a lot of people as genuinely difficult to reconcile with the warmth and friendship that the show had always presented between Roger and Wayne. A separate account confirmed that the financial situation surrounding the lost work and the lack of compensation was a real and serious burden on Roger and his wife during this period. Wayne Carini has never given a detailed, on-the-record public account specifically addressing the workers' compensation dispute or directly responding to the claim that he opposed Roger's compensation request. The most widely circulated version of events comes primarily from Roger's family and friends, shared on social media, and picked up by forums and entertainment outlets in the years that followed. What is not in dispute is what happened to the show and what happened to Roger's presence on it in the years that followed. The quiet disappearance and the show that moved on without him. After the 14th season of Chasing Classic Cars, Roger Barr simply was not in the show anymore. There was no on-camera explanation given to the audience that had spent over a decade watching him work. He was just gone, and the silence around his absence was, in the words of people who tracked the situation closely at the time, deafening. Chasing Classic Cars moved into its 15th season, which premiered on February 27, 2020, hosted by Wayne Carini on his own. The absence of Roger from the new season confirmed for fans what many had already started to suspect, that something significant had changed behind the scenes. even though nobody connected to the production was explaining what. In the vacuum created by that silence, rumors began circulating that Roger had died. Fans who noticed his sudden absence and could find no official explanation understandably feared the worst, and speculation about his death spread across forums and social media in the years following his disappearance from the show. The reality, when it eventually became clear, was that Roger was alive but had not been able to return to full-time work, either at the shop or on the show, due to the lasting impact of his health issues. His family used his Facebook page to occasionally share updates confirming he was alive and doing reasonably well, including photos from fans who recognized him out in public and wished him well on his birthday. These updates were modest and infrequent, nothing like the kind of structured public relations effort that typically surrounds a beloved television personality's health journey. They were simply a family trying to reassure a worried fan base without turning Roger's private medical struggles into a media spectacle. The show itself continued without him, moving through its later seasons on Velocity and then Motor Trend TV with Wayne as the sole on-screen lead. By the time the 18th season arrived, Roger's absence had become the show's most persistent, unanswered question. The thing longtime viewers kept asking about in comment sections and forums years after he had last appeared on screen. What none of those forum posts or speculative articles could answer, because nobody involved was speaking on the record about it, was what the actual relationship between Roger and Wayne looked like once the cameras in the workshop were no longer keeping them in regular contact. Then Roger finally spoke up. What Roger actually said when he finally spoke. For years, the absence of any direct statement from Roger Barr himself left the public version of his story entirely in the hands of second-hand accounts, family social media posts, and increasingly dramatic headlines from entertainment outlets eager to frame the situation as a full-blown celebrity feud. That eventually changed when Roger, well into his late 80s, began speaking more directly about what had actually happened. Reflecting on the period in later interviews, Roger described the toll that the injury and its aftermath had taken on him, framing the experience honestly rather than bitterly. He acknowledged that he had spent years working in physically demanding conditions, that the leg infection had been a serious medical event for a man his age, and that he had genuinely tried to return to work multiple times before accepting that his body could no longer keep up with the job he had spent decades doing. The detail he returned to that struck many people the hardest was the realization, made clear to him only once the medical bills started piling up, that despite being one of the most recognizable faces on a hit cable television show for 14 seasons, he had never actually been compensated for his on-screen appearances in the way that a featured cast member typically would be. He described himself, in his own words, as having seen himself simply as the mechanic, not the star, and said he had never really thought his appearances on the show entitled him to anything beyond his regular pay for the shop work itself. It was only when he needed financial support during his recovery that the absence of any additional compensation for over a decade of television appearances became a painful and very real problem. Roger was not someone who had gone looking for a bigger cut of the show's success. He had simply done his job, enjoyed being part of something that audiences loved, and never thought to ask for more. It was only the crisis of his health and his finances that revealed how little structural protection he actually had, despite his enormous contribution to a show that had made Wayne Carini and the F40 Motorsports brand significantly more famous and more profitable than they would have been without him. What Roger has not done, even in his later and more open reflections, is launch a sustained public attack on Wayne Carini's character. The accounts attributed to him describe disappointment, financial hardship, and a genuine sense that he had been left to manage a serious medical and financial crisis largely on his own. after years of loyal work. They do not describe him as someone consumed by anger or actively seeking to destroy Wayne's reputation. The tone, consistently, has been one of weary honesty rather than vindictiveness. That restraint is, in its own way, one of the more remarkable parts of this entire story. But did Wayne Carini ever speak up about his own perspective of what had happened? Wayne Carini's side of the story. Wayne Carini has not given a detailed public statement directly addressing the claim that he opposed Roger's attempt to secure compensation following his 2017 injury. What Wayne has said publicly, in interviews and appearances unrelated specifically to the workers' compensation question, is consistent with the image of someone who has continued to speak warmly about his years working with Roger and about the role Roger played in building F40 Motorsports' reputation. Fans who have interacted with Wayne at events, including industry trade shows where his company has had a presence, have described him as approachable and genuinely engaged when talking about the show and his career, willing to spend significant time discussing the work with fans rather than rushing through a quick autograph signing. That public warmth does not, on its own, resolve the contradiction at the heart of this story. It is entirely possible for someone to be genuinely well regarded by fans and colleagues in most contexts, while also having handled a specific, difficult situation involving a longtime employee in a way that left that employee and his family feeling abandoned during a genuine crisis. Those two things are not mutually exclusive, and the available public record does not give a complete enough picture to definitively settle which version of Wayne Carini is the more accurate one in this specific case. What can be said with confidence is that the show itself never addressed Roger's departure on screen, that the silence from the production left years of speculation and confusion among fans who genuinely cared about what had happened to him, and that the eventual information that did surface, primarily through family social media posts and later interviews with Roger himself, paints a picture of a loyal, long-serving mechanic whose health crisis exposed just how little institutional protection he actually had after over a decade of contributing to one of cable television's most beloved automotive shows. Strip away the dramatic headlines about betrayal and shattered friendships, and what remains of the Roger Barr and Wayne Carini story is something more universally recognizable and, in some ways, more uncomfortable than a simple celebrity feud. This is a story about what happens to the people behind the camera once the cameras stop needing them. Roger Barr was never the star of chasing classic cars in the way that television contracts and royalty structures typically define stardom. He was the mechanic, the supporting figure whose expertise and personality made the show genuinely better, but whose professional protection never matched the value he brought to it. When his body finally gave out, doing exactly the kind of work that had made him beloved to millions of viewers, the safety net that should have caught him was, by his own family's account, simply not there in the way it should have been. Roger Barr's circumstances, including his advanced age at the time of the injury and the technicalities of his employment status, made his situation more visible than most, because his face had been on television for 14 seasons. But the underlying pattern, a loyal worker injured on the job and then left to fight for compensation that should have been straightforward, is one that plays out in workplaces across the country every year, just without a television audience watching it happen. What makes Roger's account of all of this genuinely moving, rather than simply sad, is the lack of bitterness in how he has chosen to tell it. He does not appear to want revenge. He does not appear to be chasing a payout through public pressure or media attention. He has, by every account available, simply wanted people to understand what actually happened to him. After years of rumors that ranged from speculation about his death to vague and unverified claims about a feud between him and Wayne, that neither man had ever properly explained. At 89 years old, having survived an infection, a knee replacement, years of reduced mobility, and a financial crisis that required strangers on the internet to help cover his costs, Roger Barr's decision to finally speak honestly about what happened is not the dramatic expose that some of the more sensationalized headlines have suggested. It is something quieter and, in its own way, more powerful. It is an old man telling the truth about a difficult chapter of his life, without asking anyone to hate the person on the other side of it, simply asking to finally be heard. Do you think Wayne Carini owes Roger Barr a public response? Drop your answer in the comments below. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.